into a little bit about Hinduism. Get my other screen ready here in case I need it. All right, so first thing you'll notice, just in the title, it says Hinduisms, in parentheses, right? Hinduisms, because there is no such thing as Hinduism. Hinduism is a made-up term to describe a whole stream of religious ideas and practices that come out of the Indian subcontinent. So we're going to talk about that tonight. So, you know, we call it Hinduism, but there are all kinds of Hinduisms, just like there are different Christianities. There's Roman Catholicism, there's Eastern Orthodoxy, then there's Coptic Christianity in Egypt. There's Nestorian Christianity. There's obviously Protestant Christianity, which is not one Christianity. There's, you know, Methodists and Presbyterians and Baptists and Anglicans and, you know, Assembly of God and, you know, just anything you can think of. They all represent, yeah, they're all Christian, so they have certain things in common, but the way it's lived out can be very diverse. Same thing in Judaism. I mean, typically in Judaism, we classify things as what we call Orthodox, which is a real, not a good name, because Orthodoxy is really more about orthopraxis, how you practice the religion. Anyway, so there's no, anyway, just what I get, but we have Orthodox, which is the traditional form, and then we have what's known as Reform Judaism, which is very modernized and very liberal, and in many ways, some of Reform Judaism is very secular oriented, and so it's a whole lot easier to grasp. It's not, it's, you know, it's modernized. And then there's something right in the middle called conservative, which mixes tradition with modern expression. So it's conservative. It's right in the middle of Reform and Orthodox. But there's also Reconstructionist Judaism and Humanistic Judaism. And oh yeah, when you get to the Orthodox, there's modern Orthodox, new modern Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, and just what we, and within the ultra-Orthodox group, there are about at least 10 different ultra-Orthodox groups. So, I mean, that's just Judaism, which is only 15 million people. And, you know, so in Hinduism, there are all types of Hinduisms. In Buddhism, there are different types of Buddhisms. You know, so we need to understand that we won't be able in this class to say, this is exactly what it is. What we'll be looking is looking for the main themes, the main ideas, the main practices that are shared by a large number of people. That's all we can do in an introductory course. But if you want to dig into these things more, you know, once you've had a course like this, yeah, have at it. You know, there's an awful lot to explore out there. So anyway, so that's the first thing. I haven't even gotten to the slide yet. I'm just still dealing with the title, but actually, this is what we need to deal with on the first slide. So what is Hinduism? I'm not asking you to tell me, but that's the first thing we've got to grapple with. What is Hinduism? Well, the first non-Indian scholar who really looked at what was going on in India in a systematic way, you know, a scholar who could, you know, begin to try and understand and categorize and you know, dig into, was an Iranian scholar, technically Persian, but Persia is the old name, the ancient name for what is today is Iran. So the Iranian Muslim scholar, and he goes by his last name, al-Biruni. He has a much longer name than that, but it's just referred to as al-Biruni. He lived from 973 CE to about 1050 CE, which brings me to my first diversion before we can even get to anything. Let me find my There we go. That should bring up my whiteboard. Yes, it did. All right. So what is this thing? CE. Well, this is what you probably call AD, which means in the year of our Lord. Anno Domini means in the year of our Lord. It's referring to the years starting from the approximate birth of Jesus. Well, and there's another term that we'll use called BCE, and that's equivalent to what you've been used to probably calling BC, which stands for before Christ, right? Well, only Christians should care about Jesus. So if we're going to take some sort of way to understand the world, Jews and Muslims and Chinese and Indians and most of the world doesn't relate to this, right? So in scholarship, and this is what you're going to see in your book, and as you take academic courses at a non-religious school where we're not of a particular religious tradition, we're not pushing or supporting or saying this is what we really believe is the right way. We're just looking at this from an academic standpoint. So CE means common era. If I could only write common era, CE. So this year is 2022 CE rather than 2022 AD. And if we're talking about, before the year zero, and there is no year zero, it's either 1 or -1. So this is actually, right now, we're in plus 2022, right? Let's say we want to talk about here, let's say we want to talk about something that happened about 100 years before zero, which is approximately the time that Jesus was born. So if we want to say -100, we would say, rather than saying BC, before Christ, we'd say before the Common Era. That's what BCE stands for, before the Common Era. So I'm going to be using these terms, and you're going to see it in your book, and here it is on our very first slide, and that's just something we need to be familiar with. And I expect you to, in your writing and your communication, I don't want to see religious assertions, right? You can believe whatever you want to believe, and you can practice whatever you want. I'm all for that, or nothing, whatever you want to do. But this is an academic class, and so we will use academic language, right? So this is what I would see. So when you're writing about, and you have a date that you need to refer to. So generally, nobody says AD in normal writing anyway. We know and say in the year 1945, World War II ended. We don't have to say that's AD. We get the context there. But anything before, instead of putting BC, I want to see BCE. Get used to using that language, because it is anything else is actually discriminatory. It's saying this is the only way to understand it in light of Jesus. And that's that's it's discriminatory. You're saying that the only way to see history is to see it the way you see it from your religious perspective. And so we don't want to do that, right? Okay, so let's get back here to the PowerPoint. And let's get actually talking back. So about Hinduism again. So Al-Biruni lived from about 973 CE to the C with a period after means circa, around 1050. We don't have the exact date of his death, but that's close enough. And here's what he said and he was the first Western scholar. I mean, he was only, maybe 100, 200 miles to the west of India in Iran, but nevertheless, because they're next door neighbors. But he's the first person to actually, from a scholarly perspective, to visit India and try to understand and talk about the religious practices and the cultural practices of the people who are there. So here's what he said after having studied this all of his life and having written about this, trying to explain what is a Hindu, what are Hindus like, what is this? And he says Hindus differ totally from us, referring to Muslims. They differ totally from us in religion. So it's not the same thing. You know, that old thing, that old saw that all religions lead to Rome, that, you know, they all are heading towards the same place. All religions are about the same thing. Well, no, they're not. And so there are differences, and that's why we take a course comparing them to see the similarities and differences, all right? But anyway, so he says, as we believe in nothing which they believe, and vice versa. Now, this is not a criticism. He's not down on Hindus. This is his area of study. He's really interested in this. He's trying to share with other people. He says, but one thing you got to understand, this is a totally different way of seeing the universe and seeing your place in the universe. It is a totally different perspective. It's almost as if we believe everything differently. It's like not only are we talking a different language, but even if we were talking the same language, we would still be describing different realities. And that's probably the thing that makes Hinduism the most fun to study. And yet you sometimes are going to want to feel like, you know, ripping all your hair out. You know, if you have a pencil, you'll chew it to pieces. This is, you know, it's really baffling to you to learn how to think the way somebody else thinks from a different culture and everything in history and perspective. So one of the things that I do, and even though this is a virtual class, you need to understand that all of the things that you think you understand about religion and just life in general, that's fine. But for studying Hinduism, you got to set it all aside. Now, technically, you need to do that with every religion that's not yours. But I mean, you know, you've got to set aside your preconceived notions, your opinions, your prejudices, your reactions, your responses. Just set all that aside just to learn what's going on. All right. And one of the things that I do in class, when we meet in class, is there's an exercise that we can use. I'm going to teach you this exercise. I'm not going to make you do it, but if you're in a class, a face-to-face class, I would make you do this exercise because I want you to learn how to do this. So I'm going to demonstrate it for you. You can try it on your own. All right. And then, you know, if you want to come off of mute and do this exercise, that's fine. But I don't expect that in this class. So, and it's really something that I learned from my dog. Not this dog. I've only had this dog about 4 years, the current dog that I have. But I'm a dog lover, and I've had dogs all of my life, ever since I was 5 years old. I've always had at least one dog. And so I actually had 13 dogs in my life. So, but anyway, but one of the things I notice is when a dog approaches, gets in the bushes, or is chasing after something, digging, or sticks his muzzle in the water afterwards, one of the things the dogs do to kind of get clear of all that is they go like this, right? They shake their heads and they make a noise. Well, this is a good exercise for us because we've got a lot of connections that kind of need to be undone in our head, and just to kind of get ourselves ready to learn something new, to alert ourselves. So this is the exercise. On the count of 3, I'm going to do it for you, but this is really important. Get this right, and you're on the right start in this course. But anyway, on the count of 3, we'll go like this: 1, 2, 3. Now, if we were here, I would ask you to do it, and then I would ask you to do it again and then until everybody does it enthusiastically. The whole point of this is to say, all right, whatever I think I know, just, clear the slate, get ready for something else, and then pay attention. right? You may find yourself, particularly in this first section on Hinduism, doing that mentally, if not physically, self going, what? Huh? Feel like shaking your head and go, what? Okay. Anyway. So that's actually part of the course. All right. Anyway, hopefully you get the point that because Hinduism and India itself is baffling to Westerners. If you haven't been exposed to this, it just seems chaotic and you have no idea what's going on because we're not familiar with it. In Hinduism and is made up of, Hinduism is essentially the religion that comes out of the Indian subcontinent. It's made of, the Hindus are composed of many different people groups, many different languages, and almost an unlimited number of cultural civilizations, situations. India is a subcontinent, which is the home to a dizzying number of peoples and cultures. So what we're going to have to do is find the things that just really jump out as being central. And this is what your midterm essay is going to be, is as we go through this, what are the major ideas and practices that we can identify that are common to most people who live on the Indian subcontinent. All right. So that's what we're going to be doing here. We won't be going into detail, but it's going to seem like an awful lot of detail because it's just all new to us. But we're really going to deal with, maybe 5 or 6 major ideas. And you'll maybe pick 3 or 4 of those to talk about in your essay. We'll deal with that later. All right. So anyway, the word India comes from the word Sindhu in Sanskrit, which the Sindhu is the name of the river which divides India from Afghanistan and also from Persia, Iran. So it's the people who live on the other side of the Indus River, and where Sindhu is the Sanskrit word, but there's a Persian loan word, Hind, which means place. And so it comes into English through Persian as being Hindu, the Hindus, and the country is known as India for the Indus River, which is actually Sindhu in Sanskrit. You don't need to know that stuff. That's where it comes from. All right. But most of the time, if you meet somebody who is a Hindu and you ask them what their religion is, probably they'll say to you, I'm Hindu. But that's not really the name that they use for it. Basically, it's the traditional name is Sanatana Dharma, the eternal way. But calling it Hindu or Hinduism is it's a geographical reference to the peoples and the religions and the cultures that come out of India. So, but we'll call it Hinduism, just to be safe. Hinduism describes the religious, the philosophical, and the cultural heritage of 1.25 billion people. About 1 billion of the people who live in India are Hindu. Now, there are other religions. There are Christians. There are even some Jews. There are tens of millions of Muslims. And of course, there used to be a lot more Muslims in India. Islam comes into existence in the 7th century CE. Just 1,300, 1,400 years ago. So Hinduism already existed, but Islam has a great deal of influence and it becomes very popular, et cetera, et cetera. But in 1948, when India gets its independence from the British, there is potential serious civil unrest between those who are committed to Islam, and now they're going to be self-governing, right? Those that are committed to Islam, and as a minority amongst the billion Hindus, you know, a couple of 100 million of Muslims. So there was actually a transfer. Muslims moved, Muslim populations moved to the north and the east into what is now Pakistan, and also to from the south to the east into what's now Bangladesh. And the mostly Hindu people, they moved to mainland India and abandoned Pakistan and what's now Bangladesh. Used to be called, one was called West Pakistan and the other one was called East Pakistan, but that's not the case anymore. So there is some division, but there are Hindus who live in Pakistan, there are Hindus who live in Bangladesh, but the majority in both of those places, which are both part of the Indian subcontinent, are Muslims. So, and there's still tens of millions of Muslims in India, but in what's now the nation of India, but you know, they feel the pressure, right? So, and there's a lot of stuff going on currently where there's a real strong movement. Last 20, 30 years, there's been a real strong resurgence of a Hindu nationalism, which has made it difficult for non-Hindus, even in India, which is probably the most liberally minded religion. Hinduism is probably the most liberally minded religion, as far as you can do whatever you want to do, and you can believe whatever you want to believe, and practice whatever is practiced. There's no dogma in the Hindu religion. So there's no central authority. So but even in spite of that, people who aren't, you know, who are outside of that majority feel the pressure. So anyway, so Hinduism is a description of Indian life in religion and culture and philosophy. It would be comparable to talking about what we call Hellenism, which is the civilization, religious, philosophical, cultural civilization that was spread by the armies of Alexander the Great in the 4th century BCE, when he came out of Macedonia and conquered basically the Mediterranean and went all the way to the border of India in conquering. And he conquered incredible amount of the world. It was a world empire. Of course, that was superseded by the Romans, but what was left in much of the world was Greek culture, philosophy, and religion, which is known as Hellenism, because Hellenes means Greek. That's so Hellen is the word for Greek. But anyway, or simple, or you could compare Hinduism to Americanism. Yeah. There are elements of Americanism as a culture, as philosophy, as a way of living, and there are people who live all over the world who have embraced various elements of Americanism. But what would you say? What does it mean to be an American? Well, it's pretty much different to almost every American, right? So, but there would be some things that we could say are generally understood to be part of what we call Americans. What America is, what it represents, or Americanism, and we can try to define those, but we can even argue about those things, right? But anyway, so this Hinduism is not really a good description of just a religion. It's a description of people and culture and all of their religious ideas, and it's an overall label. So we're going to make these statements like Hinduism and Hindus believe, but it's recognizes a very broad brush that we're painting with here. And it's good news, because we're not going to go into all the details. You don't need to understand all the details at this point. So, all right, so let's try and put some meat on this, on these bones here, and let's talk about the beginning. Hinduism is in no sense an organized religious system, but it's a diverse mass of things going on. But, all religious traditions have ideas of how things started. So, for instance, in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, the beginnings are described in the first book of the Hebrew Bible, Genesis in English, Bereshit in Hebrew, but it's, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's the first verse, the first statement of the Bible. And then it describes creation and the creation of everything in the world, and on the sixth day, the creation of humankind, and then the subsequent story. But the very beginning starts before there was anything, right? So in the beginning, or you could say in beginning, but anyway, here's the beginning from a Hindu perspective. So this is actually the Hindu version of that beginning story from the creation hymn that's in what's known as the Rig Veda, one of the earliest sacred scriptures. It's actually a hymn in the Rig Veda, and it's Rig Veda 10:129 is where it starts. But anyway, let's just get into it here. It says, and this is, so let's talk about it. Then, at the beginning, then neither being nor not being existed. Neither atmosphere nor the firmament. Firmament is the sky, the clouds and the area, above the earth. So there was neither atmosphere nor the firmament, nor what is above it. What did it encompass? Where? In whose protection? What was water? The deep, unfathomable. Neither death nor immorality was there then. No sign of night or day. The one breathed windless by its own power. Not else, but this existed then. It's Old English way of saying nothing else but this existed then. In the beginning was darkness, swathed in darkness. All this was but unmanifested water. Now, if you're familiar with the account in the Hebrew Bible in Genesis, there are a lot of parallels here. So I'm not going to go over them now, but this is very, very similar to the story that is told in Genesis chapter 1 about the beginning. There are obviously some differences because it's a different perspective, but there's a lot of parallels here. Anyway, so in the beginning was darkness, swathed in darkness. All this was but unmanifested water. Whatever was, that one coming into being, hidden by the void, was generated by the power of heat. In the beginning, desire, which was the first seed of mind, overcovered it. Wise seers, searching in their hearts, found the bond of being in not being. Their cord was extended athwart. Was there anything above or anything below? Givers of seed there were, and powers. Beneath was energy, and above impulse. Who knows truly? Who can here declare whence it was born? Whence is this emanation? By the emanation of this, the gods came into existence only later. Whoa. The gods come into existence later? So the gods aren't doing this, right? Oh, that's interesting. That's a totally different perspective. Who knows whence it has arisen? Whence this emanation has arisen, whether God created it or whether he did not. Only he who is its overseer in the highest heaven knows. He only knows, or perhaps he does not know. Confused? Okay, let's talk about some of the things that we can see here, because if you just think about it, there's a lot you can understand that's going on here based on what we've already talked about in this course. So what can we see about the nature of the ultimate? Well, first of all, we see that neither being, when this creation happens, neither being nor not being existed. So before the existence of life or even the universe itself, only the one was. It talks about the one. But what is that one? It's clearly not a personal God, or be called a he, or an it, or a she, but it's called the one. So it's not a personal God. This is a monistic idea. This is basically another way to say the source, the ultimate. But there's no attributes. You can't say he, she. You can't say it's loving or anything like that. It's just, that's the source of all things. So this is a monistic idea. Now, if you don't know what monistic is, go back and listen to the previous video. But you should have, we've dealt with that, right? So before the existence of life or even the universe itself, only the one was. But what is that one? That's not a personal God. This is a monism. It says there was just this energy. And eventually you see powers beneath the energy. And that's the first indication of some sort of something coming into being, right? There is no being yet. There's no being nor not being. But now we begin to see being coming in, not yet a being, but the energy which produces life, being, and powers beneath the energy. That's the first indication of some sort of beingness. But the gods don't come until later. It says, gods only came in by the emanation of this. The gods came into existence only later. And who knows where this came from? We don't. So here the gods are identifiable beings, right? So there is this one that is somehow the ultimate source of all being. And now we have gods who are called beings. So this is the first theistic idea. But these gods, these beings that are gods, that's theism, are not ultimate. They are subordinate to whatever the one is. And then it comes with the question whether God even created the universe. And it doesn't answer this question, but the writer is coming from an idea of a God now, beginning to identify a theistic understanding that is beneath the ultimate. So this is where theology is happening. We're beginning to think theistically. We're saying, okay, now we can identify beings. So from this, we can see that the ultimate is not a being, or according to this, not even a non-being. The ultimate will just be simply known as Brahman. Brahman. Brahman is not a God. Brahman is not even God. Brahman is the source from which all being and beings come, but it is above being itself. So that's the monistic element. But you can see the theistic ideation taking place here, beginning here. So along with Brahman, who's not a person, not a being, we can encounter many gods of all sizes, shapes, and powers. And, according to the video we watched, 330 million gods, which is just another way of saying an infinite number of divine beings. It's not a mathematical total. you'll hear people talk about 33 million gods. Well, that's plenty. So that's unlimited, right? That's so however you want to describe it. We encounter many gods of all sizes, shapes, and powers, 330 million of them. So it should be no surprise that Hinduism has a monistic emphasis that they refer to as Brahman, which is the ultimate source of all. And then we have these theistic ideas that begin to develop, which are individual beings who have various powers and abilities, and they're certainly much higher in the pecking order than we are. Right? All right. Hopefully, I'm sure you didn't get all of that, but if you just get introduced to this idea. So where do we go from here? This is okay, there's this monistic idea, and then there are all this theistic stuff, and then all the confusion and everything else. So what we need to do here is we need to begin to develop some distinctive marks of the Hindu tradition. We need to begin to consider, all right, let's talk about what are the essential elements of these traditions that we can begin to describe and explain. So, and this is essentially what you're going to be doing. Now, we're going to cover a lot of different things here, but there are certain main things that, today, tonight, and next week that we will cover, where we will identify, 5 or 6 main ideas when put in practice and lived out are expressive of the essentials of Hinduism. And you're going to pick a few of them to talk about in your essay, your midterm essay. I want to remind you that there's a video that goes with that assignment. Watch the video and it will unpack the assignment for you. So, and probably a good time to watch that video and to read the assignment is now, not this minute, but in the next couple of days, and at least get it in your head what you're going to be trying to accomplish. So as you go through it, you can say, oh, that's something I want to talk about, or maybe this is something I want to talk about, and begin to kind of build an outline of the main points that you want to put in your essay, the essentials. All right. So we're going to talk about a number of distinctive elements that are, you can say, they're basically realistic for just about anyone who's in the Hindu traditions. So the first thing we need to deal with is nature itself, the cosmos, the universe, the world we live in, and the universe that we're in. Hinduism, by and large, finds nature, the universe, the cosmos, and particularly the world that we're in, because we're only now really beginning to see more about the cosmos, but the universe is real. It's real. The universe is knowable and it's orderly. So let's start with this thing real. A lot of times, what happens in life is things that we think of. We often think of them as maybe an illusion, maybe a dream. But let me just illustrate this. When I was 5 years old, I would play on Saturday mornings. I would play on our front porch. And actually, I was back in those days, they delivered milk. This is in the 1950s, early 1950s. And they still had, a milk delivery person who would come by and deliver your milk. And it actually, often they had a key to your door, your kitchen door, and they come around the kitchen and they would come and bring bottles of fresh milk and orange juice and eggs and other dairy items. And they put it right in your refrigerator. And you would leave out the empty bottles and they cart those away. Right? But they would actually put it direct. I actually did this when 50 years ago, when Peggy and I were first dating. We've been married 46 years. But 50 years ago, when we were first dating, that was my job. I lived in Houston, Texas. That's where she's from. And I had a job as a milk delivery man. You know, I got up at 3:30 in the morning, rode my bicycle to the local dairy, hopped in my milk delivery truck, and I was, you know, starting my route by 4:45. And by about 8:30, I had delivered my entire route. You know, I had more things to do, but, you know, my day started kind of early. And we were dating, and, you know, when you're dating, and, you know, you have a tendency to stay out at least, you know, often till midnight, right? And so I would drop Peggy off at her place at midnight and go home and sleep for a couple hours because I had to be up at 3:30 in order to ride my bicycle. So, because the dairy was pretty close. So anyway, so I can relate to, anyway, when I was 5 years old, it was long before I had done this job, but it was a job that was around then. It was a very common thing. And I would spend Saturday mornings playing out in the front, on the front stoop of our house, just, you know, playing games, you know, marching up and down, running my troops. You know, I always imagine myself as the, you know, the commander of a great army, and we're marching up and down the sidewalk. And, you know, I was 5 years old. You know, so, you know, just using my fertile imagination. And but the reason I was playing out front is because my mother had told me that if you can catch the milkman, and he comes kind of early, but if you can catch the milkman on Saturday mornings, you can ask him to put in a quart of chocolate milk. That was worth climbing out of bed for early on a Saturday to go sit outside and play and wait for the milkman to show up, because I could get some chocolate milk out of it. So this became my regular Saturday morning routine at 5 years old. And while I was playing out on the front, waiting for, you know, the milkman to come, I often noticed that, and I knew that my mother was there, my father was there, and they were up. My grandmother lived with us. She had already had, you know, she had been up having a cup of coffee when I woke up, you know, so there was things going on in the house. But there would often be times when I'm standing out on the porch, and I remember one particular day when I noticed that I couldn't hear any sound in the house. There was nothing going on in the house, you know, I just couldn't hear anything. And so my immediate thought was, because this is where I was at 5 years old, my picture of the universe was the universe always included me, and I was the center of everything. That was my experience, right? And I had this idea that maybe that the reason I didn't hear anything is because my parents only actually moved and functioned when I was there to see it. And so it's like, now I'm out on the front lawn, and so they're all frozen, waiting for me to enter the door, and then they'll start doing things again. That was my conception of the world. So for me, the world was somewhat of a dream or an illusion. Other than me, I was real, but the rest of the world was not real. And often in religion, in Hinduism, you know, one of the basic things is, even though the world, there's all kinds of illusions, there are all kinds of mysteries, and there are all kinds of things that we don't understand, but Hinduism believes that the universe is real. We're not just living in somebody else's dream or somebody else's imagination. You know, the good news is that you're not living in my dream. That's good, right? You know, this is real. Sorry to let you know that this is real. You know, so the only way to get out of this is sleep through it. But anyway, so the first thing we have to understand is Hindus don't see the world as anything other than real. Reality is real. We are in real circumstances. And there's an order probably should put these, it should really, the order of this would be better. I've only been teaching this particular part of the lecture since 1994, and it's only just occurred to me that really it should say real, orderly, and knowable, because that makes better sense logically. So the next thing is that you can see order in the world. And because you can see patterns and order in the world, that means that therefore you can know the world. So the world is real. There's an order to it, and we can know it. Which, by the way, if that's your viewpoint of all of existence, that it's real, that it's orderly, and it's knowable, that means that your religious perspective allows for all kinds of knowledge, and in particular, scientific knowledge. That's knowable. We can know. Science means to know. It's about knowing. So we can know things. But, in much of the history of religion, though, particularly in the West, with especially Christianity, in the last several hundred years, as it's developed, there are a lot of people say, well, you can't really know these things. We can know the world, but, and then, so you have these issues over like creation. Is this a story describing the basic pattern? Obviously, creation is real. But is it just giving us, can we really know what happened, or is it just a story to illustrate it? And there are people say, no, we can see patterns here, and there's a definite order here. And so our religious viewpoint is reality. But other people say, well, scientifically, we can see that that particular perspective isn't real. And so there becomes this opposition of science against religion. In India, there's no problem with that. It's not one against the other. It's not faith or science. It's faith and science. That's a real advantage from a worldview. You don't have to fight that battle. Anyway, so for Hindus, the cosmos, the universe, cosmos is basically a word for the ordered universe. That's where we get the word cosmology. The cosmos is both physical and spiritual. There is a physical reality, and there is a spiritual reality, and this reality is orderly and real, and it can be known, it can be experienced, it can be, you can experience it. And there's a deep sense of interrelatedness that undergirds the understanding of life, of how all this is interrelated. It's not separated, and science is over here, and religion is over here, and government's over here, and daily social life is over here, and culture is over here. It's all interrelated. And this interrelatedness runs through both space and time. There's a continuum of life in time and space. There's an interconnection through space and time. Now, this is counter to who we are as Westerners. I want to explain to you what I mean is, especially when it comes to that connection to time. We are very disconnected in the Western world from time. We're disconnected from time. We have very little sense that the past has any kind of meaningful connection to who we are. So, told you about when I was 5 years old, right? Maybe cute, but definitely silly, what I described to you. Well, now you're meeting the almost 73-year-old version of me. And hearing only that story and me telling that story, from my perspective, that's not who I am anymore. I'm not a 5-year-old anymore. I'm not a 10-year-old. I'm not a teenager anymore. I'm not a 20-something anymore. I'm an old dude. That's who I am. I am who I am today, not what I was. I've been developing, and so I remember there was when my daughter was born at a family event. She was really cute, so we're kind of passing the baby around and everybody. And my mother got inspired to, because she was so cute. My daughter was so cute that my mother got inspired to start telling stories about when I was a cute little baby and a little toddler and a little child. And she started telling stories about when I was about 5 or 6. And, by that time I was 37 years old. I was in business. I was the vice president of a life insurance company. I had modicum of success. Matter of fact, I was about to would eventually become the general manager for both my sister, who was in the life insurance business, and my stepfather, who had been in the life insurance business for over 40 years at that time. And I actually became their manager. So I became their boss. There's no bossing around your father or your sister. You understand that? But technically, I was superior to them. And here's my mother talking about all the crazy little silly and embarrassing things that I did when I was a little kid. And on the inside, I was thinking, that's not who I am anymore. Hinduism says, yes, it is. You are everything you always once were, plus what you've become. You are still connected to time. And this is going to be a really important thing for you to understand. Hindus are the connection of life and in time and space is essential. So the parent remembers the failings of a child, but the child is no longer a child anymore, but it's still the same you. So here, ask yourself a question to kind of go through this. Are you the same person that you were 15 years ago? I mean, just normally. And the answer is, well, no. I've changed, I've grown, I've developed, I've matured. Or maybe I've gotten worse, but anyway, I've changed. There's some sort, I experienced change. Well, then are you the same person that you were, say, 5 years ago? Well, I'm more similar to the person I was 5 years ago than I am similar to the person I was 15 years ago, but I'm not that person anymore. I'm here, me now. Well, how about 5 days ago? Yeah, well, I can probably point out some differences in the last 5 days. How about 5 hours ago? Yeah, let's get a little bit harder. How about 5 minutes ago? 5 seconds ago? All right. But so we say that's not who I am anymore. I've become something different. I've changed. Hinduism says, no, you're all those things. You are an accumulation of everything you have ever been and everything that you have ever done, which is shaping you and maturing you. Yes, you are growing and you're developing, but you still are the same person. You just moved into a different stage, and everything that's happened to you in your earlier life goes with you through life. And in Hinduism, it moves on with you into your next life, and the next life after that, and the next life after that. You are the accumulation of everything that you have been and done as long as you have been. So it's kind of like a snowball that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger as it rolls down the mountain, right? So the Hindu connection to time is incredibly important. This is what's going to lead us to our discussion of karma. That's the actions that you take, the responses that you have, and that stays with you always. Anyway, so So human life in Hinduism is understood to be an ongoing, substantive interaction with the lives of all creatures and with all peoples who've actually ever lived, and are living now. You are part of an organized whole. You are not separate. You are connected to everything else, and you're definitely trapped in time. Now, there is a solution to be free from time and to become something that you truly, well, we'll get there. So that's the first thing. Now, the next one that I'm just going to mention, because we're not going to go into detail about it, but there is this word in Hinduism, rita, which means order, rule, or truth. This is the principle of the natural order, which regulates and coordinates the operation of the universe and everything within it. So it could be right, order, truth. This is the concept of order, duty, ritual. I mean, you know, just an objective thing we can talk about is, here is a rule, a truth of existence, is that you can't out-jump gravity. Gravity is a rule. That's an order. It's a truth you can depend on. It's always the same. Right? So this is the natural orders that we can identify, because this stuff is knowable. So, and in religion, in Hindu religious understanding, there are orders, there are rules, there are laws, there are truths, but this is the principle of the natural order, which basically regulates and coordinates the operation of the universe and everything in it. And then human duties, as part of this order of the universe, is referred to by the word dharma, which you can see there, which are human duties as a society. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about dharma. This is one of the really significant elements, but you can call this your fate, your destiny, your moral responsibility, your purpose in life. However you understand how you fit into this pattern and order of the universe is your dharma. And we will be talking about that a whole lot. So we'll discuss this later. But the cosmos itself has an order. It's ordered. Within each level of the order of the cosmos, there are specified duties that must be carried out. And so this is that dharma thing. And there's even a dharma for the order of, for the universe itself. And this is an element that you find in all religions, that ritual, particularly in indigenous, I didn't have you read chapter 2 on indigenous religions, what we often call the earliest religions, ancient religions, before the development of ordered modern traditions, which Hindu is probably the first example of a larger structure development. But even in the most primitive, not in the sense of being, dumb or anything, primitive in the sense of being first, the initial ones, primary, what we often call primal religion, ritual is seen to be something that you do in order to restore the order. So, if something is going wrong, something is broken in your world, like for instance, the rains aren't coming, right? It's not raining, and without rain, nothing grows, and then people start dying. So you need rain, and for some reason it's not coming in the season. So what you do is you do a ritual. You do something, you undertake some sort of a ritual in order to get the universe, the gods, the powers in the universe, to bring the rain. Right? This is what's going on with this concept of dharma. In Hinduism, this is understood to be your duty in life, What are your responsibilities? What do you need to do in order to keep the universe running? And so there are certain rituals in Hinduism, activities that we do that are ritualized, that are designed to keep the universe in order. So we'll have more fun to talk about this. And that would be a good time to take a break before we get to Atman, because we're going to talk about the self.